Hello and welcome to Tokyo Inklings. My name's CY and you can find me on my website at tokyostationpens.com, on Instagram and TikTok at tokyostationpens, and on Twitter at tokyostationmnh.
And my name is Jacob. I am Fudofan on Instagram and on Twitter, and I have a blog at fudofan.com.
And this is episode, I don't even know what this is, 47? I think this is 47, Jacob.
Yeah, we were getting close to 50.
Very, very exciting. And as usual, we have a jam-packed agenda because, You know what, Jacob? We had four different events that happened between the last time we recorded and today.
Yes.
So, I'd say, I have a lot of new pens to talk about, but I say let's keep that to the next regular episode, which will not be the next episode, which is a New Year's episode, but the episode after that. So let's keep that to afterwards, and let's focus on these events, because I think these events are pretty important to talk about.
Yeah, pretty interesting.
So, I'd say let's go in order of the event, maybe starting with Wagner.
Yeah, so you didn't go to that event. I would, to be honest, you didn't miss too much, but this was Wagner's year-end event. Previously, that event has been held in Ryogoku at this KFC building, which has nothing to do with a restaurant, by the way, but now they moved to the same venue as Tokyo Pen Show, at least the same building, but a smaller conference hall. And both Alessa and I went there. I went there in the early afternoon, and you know, there's this 2,000 yen entrance fee, which is sort of a point of contention there, which I think we talked about that before. But, you know, immediately after paying that 2,000 yen fee and looking at the vendors, the table, I regretted my choices, because there wasn't much there. You had just, you know, the regulars and fewer than normal, I would say. But it turns out in the end it was actually worthwhile for a few reasons. First of all, I went to Mori-san's table, and he actually had a few pens on display available for sale that he hadn't brought to the last few events. So maybe he's rotating. I'm not sure what the methodology is, but he had some pretty interesting pens this time, including the 2013 Wagner limited edition release. So those who have heard about this pen club Wagner, they probably associate Wagner with these Platinum 3776 pens, but they have done, and they continue to do, you know, collaborations, exclusives with other pen makers as well. Nowadays, the only Japanese one is Platinum, but in the past they did Sailor as well. So the 2013
and
one,
Pilot too, right?
Yeah, they had done Pilot in the past. I think that they stopped with that, but our friend of the show, Sophia, just got a Pilot Wagner pen that looks pretty interesting.
Yeah.
But anyway, so the 2013 one was a green Sailor Realo. Actually, there were two versions of it. There was both the Sailor Prophet shape, or Sailor Knight 11, if you will, you know, the cigar shape, and there was also the Pruger shape, or which I call the daikon shape Realo. And both of them were available in a few nib options, including zoom, but there were only 3 Pruger zooms and only 3 Profit zooms in total, and he had one of each. He brought one of each to the event, and I bought both of them. So I bought 1/3 of all the available ones. And what was interesting was that most of the pens he sold, including these old limited editions, they were at the original price. So not just this one, but also he had some YY Pen Club pens and some other ones that are now long sold out, but he still had a few, and he was selling them at the original price, which was pretty interesting. Thinking about it now, I think this is how he justifies this 2,000 yen entrance fee. Right? You're getting good prices if you pay the fee. I think that's the idea.
And we'll talk about this later, but he also showed at Tono Lims, and I got the music nib
Yeah.
of the Pro Gear, and it was a little bit more expensive than what he had charged at the Wagner event, but it was not that much more expensive.
Right.
So I think it's okay.
You're getting sort of the non-member price when you're paying for the pen at Tono Lims in a way.
Well, also I don't know how Tono Lims is organizing their event, and we'll get deep into this. But I don't know if they take a cut of sales from the vendors, or if they kind of rent out the space to the vendors. So it could be possible that the space, right, costs more to do because they're only one vendor there, whereas Mori in the Wagner event, he's the guy who's collecting money from everybody else. So exactly.
Yeah, that's definitely a possibility.
Yeah.
But so those were not the only pens I got at Morrison's table. Also, a few years ago, I was so obsessed about these Fine Writing International pens, the brass pens. But then I got bored with them after a while, and I sold all of them. But I have sort of had a relapse in the last few months. I got one of the fifth generation. I found one for a good price on Mercari. And then at this Wagner year-end event, he had the fourth generation, which was meant to be a Wagner exclusive, but wasn't actually in the end, the matte black one. I think some people call it the Dark Ages. I'm not sure if that is a creative interpretation or if it's actually
I think that's the official name, the Dark Age.
So that one actually looks pretty cool. He had like 3 or 4 of them, and so I ended up getting one of them. So I'll keep that one for myself. But the other reason I wanted to mention Morrison is that I ended up talking to him a bit, and he had some interesting ideas and opinions as usual. One thing was that, he's doing these collaborations, as we talked about, with various pen makers, and he has had a bit of trouble in recent years, or maybe because of the pandemic now, because previously he ended up going on trips and actually discussing in person, what the pens are going to look like and so on. But he said that because he hasn't been able to do that now, because of the pandemic, there's been some nuances lost in translation and some misunderstandings. So one thing he was complaining about was that one of the pens that he has produced had clips. And he said that it's hard to sell pens with clips. And as I asked, do you mean in general to the Japanese pen consumer? And I said, no, I'm talking specifically about Wagner members. They want clipless pens.
Why is that?
I don't know. He didn't really have a clear explanation for that, but I thought that was kind of interesting. Another thing was I'm not sure if it's a Wagner thing or a Lichtop thing, but they have been selling pens from another European pen maker. We don't need to mention them by name, but it's a pen maker that makes their own nibs. But Morrison's opinion is that for this particular brand, he refuses to sell them online, and Lichtop refuses to sell them online because he argues that you always need to adjust them. So he will only sell them at events and at the pen clinic. I'm not sure if it's much truth to that, because this is a fairly popular brand and I haven't heard any complaints like this, but that was his opinion at least.
Well, I've handled this brand in the past. I'll have to say it's not as bad as he says, but yeah, it's also not great.
I see.
It's not great. But given, your experiences, my experiences with Mori as a nib doctor, I'm not sure that, I'm not sure a user would be able to tell the difference.
That's true, probably.
Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. The only other thing I wanted to talk about quickly about the Wagner event was that I went to Mr. Pilot's table as usual, and Alessa and I both spent quite some time there, and we both bought pens there. I bought one of those Pilot Ishime pens. I got one for a good price, and probably would keep this one for myself actually. But we ended up talking about some of the pens he had on his pen trays, and there were these Pilot pens, maybe it's 1072, I can't remember which one, but the nib was not a fine, but HF, hard fine.
On the pilot.
On the pilot, yes. So not sailor, but a pilot that said HF. And he explained that pilots did a few decades ago now, they had, in addition to the regular, so they have soft fine, they have fine. They also had, for a short period of time, hard fines, so stiffer than regular fines. And there were also hard mediums and hard broads. I wasn't able to write with them, but fortunately, Alessa bought one of those, so I'm hoping to try it out. Yes.
Very well, very well.
So looking forward to that. So that's all I had about Wagner.
Yeah, I think Wagner it's always difficult because it's not that I don't want to go. I want to go maybe twice a year. I don't want to go to all of them.
Right.
So you really have to be careful in choosing which ones you go to. But fortunately, he came out to the Tono Lims show as well, as I said earlier. I think this event will be the bulk of the discussion.
Yeah, I think so too.
Today. So we've mentioned many times that we don't cover Tono Lims on this show because they're just too chaotic to cover. But we've talked about them before. And we've talked in the early days of this show. I think it was really one of the first episodes when we went to their event, and it was just terribly organized, right? Like people got headaches because there are so many people inside Okamotoya, which is not that large of a store to begin with. And you have to line up for these tickets to go in. And back then, I would say maybe there were like maybe 1,000 people in attendance across the 2 days. Maybe. More like about 500, likely. So we've not gone to a Tono Lims event ever since that, I believe. At least I have not. Right. So Tono Lims decided to throw what they call a Christmas party, which is really just another name for a retail event.
Yeah.
And I was interested in going because some folks had asked me, "Hey, can you get me some glass pens?" And I wanted to get a glass pen from Hase for myself.
Yeah.
Right.
Good luck.
And the best way to buy it from Hase is to actually just go to his workshop, which I can do. That's fine. There's no problem in that. But I was like, you know what? Let me see if I can get there early enough to get something. Okay. And so, we actually had a pen meet scheduled on that day, and then I said, "Hey, actually, let's go out on a field trip to this Tono Lims event." So, the Tono Lims event, and Tono Lims, they post so much. But let me just put into perspective, okay? Tono Lims is celebrating their 3rd anniversary. Okay? They have 355 inks. They release a new ink every 3 days. Like, literally every 3 days, right? There's lots of stuff. I want to talk a little bit about the implications of Tono Lims and their, like, I guess, cultural implication in terms of the hobby here. But let us just describe the event first, right? They say, the event starts at 11, and you should get your ticket at 10. All right? Yeah. And they said, the tickets will be distributed at random, so it's not first come, first serve. So they don't want you to go and start lining up at 6 o'clock. Okay? Which sounds fair, right? So far.
Yeah.
Yeah, sounds fair, sounds reasonable. Alright, so I get there at 9:55, and I think I'm like the 500th person there.
You posted Instagram story photos there, and we were all laughing. It looked like Bungo Joshi.
Well, I went to Bungo Joshi before, and I want to draw a comparison between Bungo Joshi and this later. Sure. So I was there. I was like, 400 to 500th in, to arrive. But the thing is, there's no sign saying where they're gonna hand out these tickets, because from the photos that Tono Lims had posted, it seemed like you get it inside the building, but apparently it was outside. And I saw this mob of crowds. I swear, these people, they are a mob, right? It's like I thought I was in some kind of a political protest.
Right.
And they're all standing there. And then all of a sudden, they saw some of the volunteers come out. In an instant, everybody synchronized, starts moving to the front. And I'm like, they told us that the tickets are distributed by, at random, so it doesn't really matter if you go to the front or not. But actually it does, because the opportunity for you to pull a earlier number is indeed higher if you pull it earlier, right? If you're in the front of the line. But it also increases the opportunity for you to pull a lower number. So the probability is the same, but the opportunity is different, right?
There's one more thing, right, which is that if you manage to get a low number, if you're not actually there by the time it opens, you don't benefit from it, right?
Well, you do, because you can go in at any time.
But I want to explain the whole Seriken situation later. It ties into that.
Yeah. But in terms of like going into the event, so I got there and I waited like 40 minutes to get my ticket.
Yeah.
I pulled number like 316 or something.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, it's whatever number. I knew I wasn't going to get anything by that point, right? If I wasn't in the top, 100, I wasn't going to get anything.
Yeah.
And then you, Jacob, come at like 10:50. Right? So I've already been there for an hour. I've been waiting for an hour.
Yeah, so there was still a line, but there were, I would say, maybe around like 50 people. So I had to wait in line maybe for like 10, 20 minutes tops. And I got a ticket, and my number was like 145 or something like that.
So mind you, right? They did the ticket system in the worst way possible, right? COVID, our numbers are not bad now, pretty low, but they had everybody waiting outside in the cold, 500 people squished together in a line, right? And then they printed out little tickets with QR codes on them. They put them in a paper bag, and you would have to stick your hand into this paper bag and draw out a number, right? And my complaint here is they should have just done this via Google Forms so that people don't have to line up at all, because the distribution is random, right? So it doesn't matter if you distribute it before or after. Just send a QR code to somebody's email. It's much easier, much more sanitary in these times. So anyways, we get there, you get 150, I get like 300, whatever. So I think you waited for like 30 minutes, maybe 40 minutes to get into the event. And actually your number wasn't even, I mean, my number is not that bad, because Alessa came maybe 11:10, and they drew numbers like 450.
Yeah.
Or they were given 450. So I already knew that given each glass pen maker brought about 30 glass pens, right? I'm number 300. I knew I wasn't going to get anything. But for me, the value of going there was kind of witnessing the comedy of this organization, or lack thereof.
Yeah, I mean, that was the same for me, right? I mean, obviously, as you said, we were planning like a pen group event, right? So we wanted to go there for that reason. But for me, I just wanted podcast topics, and we certainly did get that. You
got in at 11:30, right?
Yes.
All right, so tell the listeners your experience going in at 11:30.
Yeah, so first of all, about the tickets, I agree that it wasn't ideal to distribute paper tickets. But if you take that as a given, if for whatever reason they had to do that, what I did like about the system was that if you scanned the QR code, you got to this little website that told you the current number. Right? You didn't have to wait in line outside the actual event. You could just go to a cafe as we did, and you see that as it was getting closer, you could go up there.
That was good.
Yes. So it was still actually surprisingly hard to find the actual event because it's kind of a conference building. It was very confusing, I think, and the maps didn't really help much, I think. But eventually I found a big group of people, and you can kind of tell that these are the Inkunuma people. They are telltale sign. Okay, here they are, right? So I went there, and you had to wait in line again to get to the elevator, and then you get up to the elevator, and then there was the third line there once you get up the elevator to actually enter the room, right? So fine. So you're waiting in line a few times, then you're finally there. And the setup was that there were like 3 big sort of conference rooms, ballrooms, kind of, and each of those rooms had its own main draw, its own center of gravity. For one of the rooms, the main draw was Studio Tessar, which I think maybe are not that well known outside Japan, but it's one of those like boutique glass pen makers that are very popular, and the production is very, very small, so it's incredibly hard to buy pens from Tessar.
They're known for making very intricate and elaborate, like much more intricate than the other 2 main draws that we're going to talk about. They're making like snowflakes and like universes and all this stuff, right? Yeah,
for sure. And then in the next room, the main draw was Glass Studios 2s, and we have talked about Glass Studios 2s before. You know, they had these the ribbon nib, the stub nib, and so on. They had other glass pens as well. They were, by the way, in the same room as Kobayashi, and you know, in the fountain pen world, Kobayashi are, you know, one of the most popular retailers, right? Because their limited editions are super popular. I mean, Kobayashi
nobody was at their table.
So Kobayashi actually brought all of their limited edition sales at Ichigo or whatever and to others, and they had some interesting inks, including the chroma shading inks, and they brought their Maki decimals that a lot of people are asking about. So I'm sure there were some people there, but there was nothing compared to 2s, right? And then, of course, in the third room, possibly the most popular one of them all was Hase. So Hase are like they are royalty in this community, right?
And I want to point out here a conversation that I overheard while I was in line. You know, I was in line for an hour. So there's a group of 4 ladies who are behind me, and this is what Tono Lims is so good at. When they created this Tono Lims community, these ladies were talking about these, you know, glass pen makers like Hase, Tessar, you know, Tus, Betchori. They're like, oh yeah, and Betchori, blah blah blah. Oh, he likes this, right? Blah 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 blah. As if they knew these folks personally, right? And that's the magic of this Tono Lims event, is that they really make you feel like you're part of this journey. So when we look at Tono Lims' Instagram, a lot of it is like random. It's really random, right? They're like a bunch of hand-drawn bears. But the way that they've kind of set up the system, and this kind of low volume sales model really makes the consumer feel like they're part of that community, right? Really part of that inner circle. And on top of that, while we were waiting, Hase-san, so you know, the guy that makes the pens, and Betchori came out, and they were treated like rock stars.
Yes.
Right? We were all in line. They came out, they went to like the convenience store or something to get a drink, or maybe. And these ladies behind me, they're like, oh, Hase is out in his, signature purple suit. Yeah, he really likes purple. Oh, but it's not that uncommon to see Hase coming out. But it's much more uncommon to see Betri also out with him to go to the convenience store. Like, this is the kind of conversation that they were having, right?
You almost expect someone to start like a celebrity like blog or magazine, just covering these people. Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. And these folks, they know that they are being treated like rock stars, because when Hase and Betri came back, he starts waving his hand, like the Queen of England, and he says, "Good morning, everybody," and like clockwork, everybody, does like faces him, does a little bow, says, "Good morning, Mr. Hase," and it's crazy. They are rock stars.
Yeah, I think they are enjoying it.
Yeah, but anyway, sorry, you were talking about being inside.
Yeah, so those were the 3 rooms. So I went to the room with Studio Tessar, and I didn't fully understand the system at first, and I saw the various glass pens that Tessar had on display, and I saw that there were like 10 people waiting in line to get to that table, and it seemed like he seemed to have like good 20-30 pens available, and there were like 10 people, so I thought maybe I will actually have a chance to buy a Tessar pen. So I naively lined up, and like some event organizer looked at me as I was a complete idiot, and he asked me, where's your Siriken? And I just didn't really understand what they meant. I said I have my event ticket, and no, you need a special ticket only for this table. And I said, okay, I didn't know that. Okay, can I get one? No, they are already gone for today. Already at that point, and it was still before noon, there was no chance to buy a Tessar glass pen at that point.
Yeah, so it was 30 minutes after the event started. Yeah. And maybe we want to explain this concept of a seiriken.
Yeah, go ahead.
So a seiriken is a ticket for your place in line, so you don't have to stand there and keep waiting. So what these folks have done is that they knew that their products will be very, very popular, so they've actually given a ticket inside the event after you get your main ticket in order to buy these products. Now, as far as I understand, only these 3 big, let's say, star companies had seiriken systems. Not all tables had them, right? And I think it was like at 11:34 or something, you went to Tus.
Yeah, so I also went to Hase, and it was the same story with Hase, like the seiriken, so they were gone very early, no chance. I did manage to get one seiriken for Tus, but as they gave me that seiriken, they told me, you may be able to buy some ink, but don't expect to be able to buy any glass pens, basically. All this in friendlier terms, but that was sort of the gist of it, right? Your number is so high that, don't get your hopes up.
So you were number 64, right? And you passed your ticket to me because you were going to go home. I went up at around 12:30-ish, and at that time they had called number 300. I was like 300 and, 14, 15. And they said, "Oh, yeah, it's really crowded up there. If you're beyond number 300, you should go and have lunch first, because you're not going to be able to get in." I said, "Oh, well, all right." So we all went and had lunch. Had a nice lunch with Hiroko. She gave us some pins back. And so we had a nice hour-long lunch. Went back up. I bought the pen from Mori. Walked around. And then it was maybe like 2 o'clock or something at this point, maybe 2:30. I take the ticket that you got. I go to Tus, and you got number 64 at 11:40 maybe.
Yeah.
Right, at 2:30 they were at number 43, and they told me, "Oh yeah, all the glass pens have been sold out for today." And I was like, "Oh, okay. Then I don't need this anymore." And then the lady or the staff there's like, oh well, but you can still buy the inks. I just felt like, well, I'm not going to wait another 2 hours, right, to go back and buy a 30 milliliter bottle of Tono Lims inks. That's not really what I'm there for. So
yeah, and I think that's true for a lot of people, right? So there was tons of ink available, including some really interesting Kobayashi chroma shading ones, as I said. And also, even if you're not interested in glass pens, there were some really interesting fountain pens there. And Morrison brought one of the Wagner 3776 pens. Ishimaru Bunkodo brought the most recent limited editions. Kobayashi brought the limited editions. There were a lot of other pens. But it was so obvious that most people who went there, at least the people who were motivated to get there early, they were there for glass pens. And not just for any glass pens, right? They were table selling some more like generic glass pens. They didn't seem to move much inventory.
No.
There's a small number of glass pen makers that everyone wants to buy.
But I want to talk a little bit about the implications of Tono Lims and their kind of cultural impact on the space, because, and here's where I have to give credit to Tono Lims. They've really brought up the industry, right? Because 3 years ago, right, I was the first one in our group to buy Tono Lims inks. I was probably one of the first people in Japan to own Tono Lims inks. I bought their prefecture series, Tokyo, Kyoto, and Nara. I bought them off of Amazon. At that time, they had just a Twitter. They were showing, and I was interested in them because they showed off some like fluorescent inks, as in glow in the dark. And I thought, oh, these guys might be pretty interesting. I wanted to check them out. I still really like those prefecture inks that they came out with, but nobody had heard of them, and nobody had heard of Hase. Nobody had heard of Tus. Betchery had 5,000 followers. And remember when we went to that first Tono Lims event at Okamotoya? Betchery was attending as an attendee, and he even came out and like chatted with us, right? He's like,
and even 1 year before then, when they had that strange event in Yaesu, right? It was almost impossible to find. It was a very small venue, and I think Betchery was there too, but he was definitely not a rock star back then.
No, and they were in literally, half an office space, like Japanese office space, right? So maybe it was 25 square meters room with like shoddy tables and like paper signs back then. Now what they've done is they've actually created an alliance between these glass pen makers and Tono Lims, releasing these special editions just for these shops with the cool and quirky names. I bet you he had 5,000 followers 3 years ago. He has 53,000 now. He's published 3 books now. Right? Yeah. He's holding workshops. His workshops cost $200 to attend for like an hour of workshop. It's crazy. And so what Tono Lims has really been successful is building that hype and also making it very profitable for these glass pen makers and also for Betchery as well. Making it really profitable. And I think in some ways they probably saved a lot of these companies from, going out of business. Because if you imagine like a COVID where, let's say a company like, I don't know, Hase didn't have a Tono Lims, it's harder now to get out there. Nobody knows who you are. And these glass pen makers, they didn't start off making glass pens, right? They're more like general glass pen folks. Studio Tus, they have stuff in like the Hyatt out in Nara. So they start off as generic, like general glass artists, I guess. And now most of their business is in pens, I would say almost single-handedly because of this huge alliance with Tono Lims.
Yeah, I think you're right about that, and I think it's very telling that you cannot buy any Tono Lims inks from Marsden or Itoya, for example. That's not the kind of collaborations they do. They collaborate with mostly like small retailers or even individuals, right? So some of these names, like Shokido, for example, it's like one person doing this as a side business, right? And then you have influencers like Moe, they have their own ink. That's the kind of collaborations they do, and that's only possible because, as you say, that they are able to do very small volumes, right? I mean, I don't think Moe can sell like hundreds of thousands of bottles, right? You have to be able to do it in small volumes. And then the other thing, as you say, is that they managed to sort of coordinate and bring this community together, and the glue is actually the various ink collaborations that they all have in common, and they sell each other's ink, which I think is so fascinating during these Tono Lims online events. You can go to Kobayashi and buy like Ishimaru Bunkudo inks and so on.
Yeah, and not only that, right? They actually make inside jokes with each other, but it's not inside because they do it on Instagram.
Yeah.
So you'll notice that this alliance of retailers and glass pen makers, they all have this crazy bear, and each one of them has a different bear. So they're represented by different types of bears, and the story is that these bears have come out from like outer space, and they're like visiting Earth, and they've become friends with like the humans. Essentially, that's the storyline behind the whole, actually the entire alliance. So they've got a lot of space themed inks, and I think because they're the folks that are also behind Colorverse, that's what I've heard. That doesn't really surprise me. The bears, they've come up now with the third anniversary. They call it Contact. So each shop has a different contact ink. So there's like Contact 2, like first contact, right? So the whole story is like a community driven story, and they've brought out these folks who are not necessarily into fountain pens, but especially these glass pen ladies who see how refined, how special, how beautiful these pens can be, and those are the people that are really driving the market in this space. Actually, Betchori has his own exclusive Hase glass pen that you can only buy when you go to his workshop. So they're also collaborating even outside of Tono Lims as well. But they've really brought together this group of friends, or they've become friends. They saw this market opportunity, and they really took advantage of it. Because at the Nihonbashi events, the first events, right, in 2019, nobody was sold out. Right. Nobody was sold out, and now you can't even get into the event.
Yeah. And I think and related topic, and we're going to talk more about that in our year-end episode, I guess. But I mean, one of my failed predictions was that big glass pens would take off more in the West, and I think that definitely hasn't happened. And what I have come to realize is that it's not just about any glass pens. It's, as we said, only a small number of glass pen makers that have really caught people's attention here in Japan. And what they all have in common is that the production is so low that even if you are here, you live here, you go to the events, and you line up 1 hour before the event, you still can't actually buy this event because it's so hard to buy these. Then people outside Japan have just no hope of acquiring these, and if you can't buy them, it's hard to be too excited about them.
But I do see a space for U.S. glassmakers to get into the glass pen business, because a lot of my friends, a lot of my contacts in the U.S., they're asking me, hey, can you help me get this glass pen? I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't know if I can help you get these glass pens. I mean, that's the honest truth, right? But it's not like glass making or glass blowing is, a Japanese thing.
Right.
We're watching on Netflix Blown Away.
Mm.
It's about like glass making. Like that show has a bunch of, you know, glass blowers who are blowing like all sorts of artistic things. There are people in the US who probably can do this but haven't
Right.
yet. So maybe there's a space for that.
Yeah, I hope so. I agree that this is definitely not a Japanese thing,
Yeah.
but it has taken off in a whole different way here. And I think, again, availability is the big thing. People often complain, I mean, rightfully so, that it's hard to buy, say, like Shishikura pens or, you know, certain pilots' custom releases or whatever outside Japan, right? If
Yeah.
you are here, then it's not particularly hard. It's a whole different level, these glass pens, right? It is incredibly hard to buy them, even if you are here and you're willing to put in the time and effort to go to these events. And they are limited in a whole different way, right? I mean, it's simplified, but you can kind of argue that for some of these, like Sailor Pro Gear limited editions, Sailor can almost turn a knob and produce another 500 of them, right? It's not the same thing with these glass pens because they are made by hand by artisans, and it takes like 2 or 3 hours to make each one, and they are clearly not able to scale up the production in the same way. So they are truly limited.
Yeah, for sure. All right, shall we move on to our next topic, which is Bungajoshi. Bungajoshi took place on the same weekend as Tono Lims. The reason why I wanted to go to Bungajoshi was actually because of a glass pen. So Bungajoshi this year, as every year, and interestingly this year they didn't have their crowdfunding event, but they had, as usual, one of the biggest, absolute biggest events. You had to line up. So you bought a ticket weeks in advance, and then once you get there, we bought the first block of the first day. We didn't get the special block, so we were actually the second batch of people to go in. But you bought a ticket 4 or 5 weeks in advance. You go there, there's a line for you to go line up, and then after that we got I think we were in block Q, so it was A, B, C, D, F, G all the way up to T, and we were in block Q, so we were fairly behind in the grand scheme of things, but still in the first block. At least we got to go in, and that was much better organized because at least you knew when to show up, and you didn't have to wait that long. But yeah, I think 80% of the folks there were women. And one of the main draws was this unicorn glass pen by Paraglass. Did you see this pen?
I saw your stories, yes.
Yeah, I'm sending you an Instagram post right now. This pen was, again, limited, in a truly limited way, made by hand, unicorn, and Akane and I, we went and we knew just this is the one that we want to get. Everything else is secondary. We got the last 2, so you're only able to buy 1 each. They didn't even have it at the Paraglass booth, and we went pretty early. Like we were the first block, and there were already things that were sold out at Paraglass. So glass pens are really becoming a trend here. But fortunately, I managed to get that. That's going to the USA.
Of course.
Another thing that I want to talk about from Bungajoshi, I don't want to go too much into detail because we've already explained it at length last year. I went to Sakai Technical's table, and one of the things that they were saying is that you get to try out the new Sanzen Tomoe River.
Right.
So I went over and I tried it out. When I was trying to write on it, the guys at Sakai Technical were very, very insistent that these are just prototypes and the formula might change before the actual release. which is very curious because we've already gotten several samples of Sanzen, right?
Yeah.
And what's very curious is that they were actually surprised that we had written with some Sanzen paper before. They thought they were the first.
Right.
And they said they don't know when the Sanzen version will be out in the market. They're sure that it will be within next year, but they're not sure if it's, early next year, is it? And I asked them, I was like, next year as in March next year or next year as in December next year, right? It makes a big difference.
Yeah, I think they're talking about their own paper products based on Sanzen, right? Because what I've heard is like what Tomogawa told me when they were still like doing the whole PR thing for Sanzen. They said that we expect this to be available somewhere between January and March, and then one of the wholesaler that is very well informed told me that it might be as late as June, but probably not later than that.
Yeah, my sources also told me around April, so that's what I had expected. But yeah, we will see, and we'll see if Sakai Technical will still have a special relationship with Tomoe River as they did when it was produced by Tomoegawa.
Yes, it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah.
Just one thing quickly about Bungo Joshi. So I actually went there not this year, but like 2 or 3 years ago, and I remember, waiting in line in like freezing cold in December, and the lines were incredibly long. And this was, before the pandemic had started, and I decided that this is something you only need to do once in a lifetime. This event, I think, it's a little bit like, climbing Mount Fuji. This is saying that a wise man climbs Mount Fuji once, only a fool climbs twice. I think that's true for Bungo Joshi as well.
Yeah, I think if there's nothing that you're really gunning for, there's not really much of a point. But in terms of the attendance, right? Even during pandemic times this year, if I just calculate if they've sold out of the tickets, which they have, if only 80% of folks show up, there would still be attendance in excess of 14,000 people over the 4 days of Bungo Joshi. And compare that with Tono Lims. Tono Lims maybe had 600 people, maybe 500 on the first day, and probably 300 on the second day. Tono Lims, the first day started at 11, the second day started at 9 a.m. Those cruel people asked their fans to come out at 9 a.m. And they did have fresh batches of pens for the second day.
Right.
But I want to point out that the scale is totally different. Bungo Joshi is at least, 10 times, maybe 15 times larger than Tono Lims. And yet still, the rock stars Hase, Toos, they choose to show at Tono Lims rather than at Bungo Joshi, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah.
All right. Last thing. So the day after we went to Tono Lims, I actually went to Nagahara. He was having a custom kai, so he was having a pen doctor event out at a Bungo Box. And I had really one main reason why I wanted to go. Well, two actually. So one, I have acquired a gold stacked nib, stacked by a US nib doctor, but they've stacked it really the entire nib one on top of the other, right? So not the way that Sailor does it, which is just the tines, but on top of each other. And I wanted to know what Nagahara thought about this style of stacking, because it's very different. The skills you need to do, the steps you need to take are totally different.
Right. And
my second reason for going is I had stacked a supernova. So the Pro Gear supernova that Kaoru-san had come out with for Bungo Box, I posted on Instagram stories, and Kaoru-san said, "Hey, come over next weekend and talk to Nagahara, and we want to see it." I was like, okay. So I go there. First, let me talk about the stacking with just the tines versus with the whole nib. I think that stacking with the tines, it's a much more complex stacking method, but in the end, it's easier. The reason why I say this is because, have you ever tried to stack one nib on top of another? Like just putting them on top of another?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so if you take a nib, like maybe any random steel nib, take a Yowo size 6 nib, you put another Yowo size 6 nib just on top of it, it won't stand flush, right? There's going to be a huge gap because the nib is curved, right? So
does the geometry matter then? I'm thinking of nibs that are more flatter, like the Platinum 3776 nibs.
As long as there's a curve, which most nibs do have, you will have this problem. And that's because physically, it is impossible to stack two items that are identical one on top of the other. In that shape. If you want to stack it, the top nib has to be bigger. It has to be bigger so that the wings can be slightly bigger to accommodate the bottom wings. Because if they're exactly the same dimension, they would hit at exactly the same place. That's why in stackable products, you see that there's like the corners, there's a little like part near the edge where it's a bit indented, and then it comes back out, right? That's
right.
That's because you want to make a small indent so that it can fit one on top of the other. Now nibs aren't made like this, right? So what you need to do is you actually need to shave the sides of the bottom layer and the inside of the sides of the top layer in order to get it to stack flush. So it's very, very difficult. And I showed Nagahara, and Nagahara said the way that this is stacked, he doesn't have an opinion on whether you do it, just tines only or nib on top of each other. But he does have an opinion in that because the top and the bottom do not naturally sit flush to each other, when you do that, what happens is you actually force the sides of the tines to spread out a bit, right? Because you're trying to force one tine on top of the other. That pulls the tines a little bit apart on the top. So you don't get a flush tipping on the top layer. So the one that the sample that I had and that I showed him, the bottom layer was flush, right? It closed just a little bit at the tip. The top was not flush at all. It came apart a little bit. And he said this means that the cross is not properly done.
I see.
And it's important for the cross to be properly done because while it might write now, eventually it's going to get scratchier and scratchier. So even on mine, on my Supernova, he actually adjusted it for me because he wanted to, and he spent a lot of time making the vertical slit aligned. So that was really interesting. And then on a side note, while he was doing my nib, I asked him, hey, what about the King Cobra? Like, why did Sailor make this King Cobra? And one thing that I thought it was interesting, he said, well, you got to ask the guy up there. So I don't know.
I see.
So that was a funny episode with Nagahara. But yeah, I think that's all we wanted to talk about today. Is there anything else from you?
No, that's it. And I need to drop off soon, as you know, so this is perfect.
Yep. So we'll see each other again next week for our New Year episode. But meanwhile, that's been the episode. Thank you everybody so much for listening. My name's CY. You can find me on my website at tokyostationpens.com, on Instagram and TikTok at tokyostationpens, and on Twitter at tokyostationmnh.
And my name is Jacob. I am foodafan on Instagram and on Twitter, and have a blog at foodafan.com.
Thanks and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.